with regards to the origin of our faith. Authentic faith arises from within the individual as a free choice in their response to love and forgiveness, whereas a toxic faith is imposed from the outside on an individual without the exercise of their free choice, and they are coerced to believe something. Now, in a lot of respects, that's what happens to every child growing up. Every child growing up is indoctrinated or brought into whatever their parents or their authorities believe. And so every child growing up naturally experiences their own version of a toxic faith because they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a choice of what religion they were going to go into or what church they were going to go to or even what God they were going to pray to. They were indoctrinated by their culture. And we understand that. And that's why many people have said, oh, I'm going to wait till my kids are old enough to make up their own mind about church and this, that, and the other. And I understand what they're trying to do, but they're trying to break that toxic faith that is naturally imposed on children as they grow up. The authentic faith that they need will come about by their own free choice to respond to love and forgiveness as they experience that in their lives. And another level that's just equally as important as the origin is, and that is, what's the focus of our faith? In a toxic faith situation, the focus is always on self-effort, self-improvement. What do I have to do to get God to bless me? Authentic faith, however, has a totally different focus. It's focused not on self-effort, but on divine provisions. What has God done for me that I couldn't do for myself? The focus is on the goodness of God. The focus is on what God has provided for me rather than what I have to do to earn his blessings. But probably the most telling difference between toxic faith and authentic faith is found in the expression of that faith. Authentic faith is expressed by love, compassion, tolerance for others. Toxic faith, on the other hand, is always expressed by seeking power and control over others. So, by virtue of these three levels, and I know I've gone through it very quickly with you tonight, but by virtue of these three levels, the difference between toxic faith and authentic faith is absolutely essential for us to understand if we're going to recover in grace. You see, the kind of faith step 2 is talking about is an authentic faith. It's not a faith that is imposed on you. You're not told what to believe. It's a free choice on your part to believe that there is a power, i.e. God, and he is able to restore you to sanity. It's for the reasons of this toxic faith slipping in that I believe that AA originators decided to just simply refer to God as a power, a higher power, greater than us. Now, one of the things that we've got to identify with more than anything else is the difference between AA as a spiritual but not religious program. This is essential that we understand. You see, the second step here came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity is not a step into some kind of religion. It is a spiritual step, yes, but it is not at all religious. And it's really important to identify the difference between spirituality and religiosity. Religions of all sorts, regardless of the type or origin, have a tendency to formalize, ritualize, and legalize personal spiritual experience. You see, you may have a spiritual experience of one sort, maybe radically different than mine, but the tendency to formalize that, to ritualize that, or to legalize that is the development of religion. Let me give you a silly illustration I always use in my classes. when I teach on this particular point, and that is that let's suppose that I'm a raging crack addict, and that I have suffered immensely from my crack addiction. I've lost my family and friends, I've lost my health, I've lost my money, et cetera, and I've hit bottom. And one Friday evening, about midnight, I go into my closet, stand on my head in my buffalo briefs, and speak in tongues. And lo and behold, I'm delivered. I mean, I'm radically delivered from that addiction. The next day, I have no craving for it. I have no desire for it. I am totally set free. Now, of course, I would want to share that news with other people who might find it a little strange. If you think that kind of a spiritual experience is strange, I urge you to read the Bible. There are some really strange spiritual experiences recorded there. But that notwithstanding, I want to share my experience with others. And as I do, other people say, you know, I want that too. I'd like to be free too. And so I tell them, all right, next Friday night, I want you to show up at my house and get ready to get in the closet. What have I done? I've just formalized my spiritual experience. And next Friday night, now you're going to get your buffalo briefs and you're going to stand on on your head and speak in tongues. What have I done? I've just ritualized my personal spiritual experience. Now, when you come to my house, stand on your head, speak in tongues, and nothing happens, we're saying I've got to be a little more savvy here. I've got to begin to legalize it and say, look, you have not done it right. There were specific ways in which you must have done this, and somehow you must have screwed it up. So what started out as my spiritual experience turned into a religion because I formalized it, I ritualized it, and I legalized it. I just had the spiritual experience of the buffalo briefs in the closet. I know Bill was trying to put a pair of buffalo briefs up there on the screen a minute ago. I saw the flag. There it is. All right. I just wanted to make sure you all knew what that meant. Anyhow, what I'm saying is the spiritual experience may be genuine. It may be true. And it happened to you, and nobody can deny the fact that you had that experience. That's all well and good. It's as it should be. But when you begin to formalize, ritualize, and legalize that experience to get other people to have the same kind of result, that's when you just turned it into a religion. Now, spiritual experience, the spiritual awakening, the big book calls it, is absolutely vital to recovery. We've seen testimony after testimony. The big book's full of testimonies that say their recovery was based on a spiritual awakening. They had to have a spiritual experience with a power greater than themselves for recovery. They understood that. It's absolutely necessary. But when it becomes religious in nature, when it becomes transformed into a religion, then it's harmful. And for that reason, the AA program maintains the spirituality based on biblical roots, but denies and seeks to prevent any type of religiosity that may develop from that. So the authentic faith in God and His provisions for us is the basis of that spiritual awakening, spoken of by those in recovery, spoken by all the testimonies of those in the big book, basing their recovery on a spiritual awakening. Because our natural tendency, however, is to turn a spiritual experience into a religion. We've got to be careful to make the distinction between the two. What we're talking about in the 12 steps of AA is not religiosity. What we're talking about is true spirituality based on authentic faith that is absolutely essential for your recovery. That's what step 2 is all about. Step 2 is the exercise of an authentic faith, which is our central responsibility of all humanity. You see, what God demands out of us more than anything else is simply to trust Him to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. God does not want us to try hard to give it up. God does not want us to try hard to be better. He wants us to trust Him, His provisions for us, and who He's made us to be, and what He's done for us we couldn't do for ourselves. That is the beginning of recovery. Step 2 is essential in that spiritual awakening. Now, it is also a bridge to the third step, which we'll be talking about more in depth next week. When we have that spiritual awakening, when we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, then it's only natural that we should turn our will and our lives over to the care of that higher power, or God, as we understand it. And we'll talk more about that next week. But for right now, I'd like to bring in our panel now. I'd like for us to discuss and hear from the others concerning their own Buffalo briefs. Bill, we'll start with you.
Well, before we bring everybody on, just for our visual learners, I'm going to give a meme up here to review, a little visual for the review of step 1 that you did. That's what you look like when you try to control things. All right?
Yeah.
And
Her life really is unmanageable. I can see from here.
Yeah. And then a visual for our step 2. But in case you want to try out John's radical, those what Buffalo briefs look like. You want to try out his theory that he tried tonight. We're going to bring Pam Herman back on.
Hey, Pam.
Cleveland. And we got Dave Currington in the house tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And Tom. Yeah, one of the interesting things about this whole class, and probably the real power punch behind this class, is the fact that we can add you guys to the mix here. And the new man on the block here, Dave Currington. I want to introduce him just very briefly. Dave has been a friend of mine for over 30 years. We met in a rehab program at Dunklin Memorial Camp, in which he took the Alpha series and then later went on to study intensely the 12 steps. And I want to begin with having him talk a little bit about the synergy between the 12 steps and AA from his own experience, because I think he has something of value here to share with all of us so we can learn. So, David, go ahead.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, my experience is, it ended up at Dunklin Memorial Camp from that same person you just talked about, John, the crack addict, alcoholic, crack addict, crazy, out of control, couldn't stop, had no power at all, didn't know anything about AA or recovery, really, of any sort. I'd gone to some AA meetings, but just wasn't at that point. So ended up there, started learning from them. Then shortly after that, John came to the camp and he presented something that I just went to like a magnet, and in reference to the Alpha series. So I was there for the program for 6 months and then stayed on an additional 6 months, just basically to be a part of what John was doing and teaching. You guys have to excuse me, I'm a little nervous. I've never done this before. But then I walked out of there. God did some radical things in my life, brought me a beautiful woman that I ended up getting married at Dunklin after I finished the program, went back to the family business, thought I understood, thought I knew who I was, and I did. God had revealed to me some of what John was teaching, enough that started changing me. But I have the disease of alcoholism as well. And during that process of 5 years, I started building up resentments, anger towards circumstances. Me, I'm very sensitive. People say something and I take it to heart, and then I get a resentment. So I started letting resentments build up. And then I ended up 5 years later relapsing and basically just kind of going off the deep end for about 6 months. Just kind of really threw in the towel and said, I can't overcome this. But then God started working me into AA, told me to go to AA. So when I started going to AA and working the steps, I still didn't throw myself into AA because I was still more leaning towards the alpha. So then I struggled back and forth between AA and alpha. And after several more relapses, I came to the point where I know I needed AA and I had to have it. And the synergy between the two started changing me. And John taught me a long time ago that recovery or walking out a new life is one step of faith after another. So I had to let go of my preconceived ideas of how God was going to work in my life, thinking it was totally the Alpha series. And it wasn't. It was a combination of the two. And I've proceeded and looked into a lot of other different recovery programs like CR, Celebrate Recovery, and just in my process, I've been involved in several different types of AA meetings, just trying to get to the truth so my life could change. That's a little bit about me.
Okay, thank you, David. And I might add, knowing you as I do from over the last 30 years, your life has changed, brother. You're still changing, but I know your life has changed.
Yes, sir.
I want you to weigh in here on step 2. Pam.
Pam?
Miss Pam.
Okay. Couple of things that came to my mind as you were talking. Because I walk in what I call all 3 worlds. I tell people I'm trilingual. I speak psychobabble, 12-step-ish, and Christianese equally fluently. I can say whatever somebody wants to hear in their language. And I have been, well, I can't say that here probably, but I upset people equally in all 3 worlds. I'm not religiosity enough for the Christian people. I'm too religiosity for the secular AA people. I stand the psychology people's hair on end on all sides. So I get confronted regularly. And one of the things that I like to share with people is that a 12-step program is not a religion. My definition of religion is that it talks about what happens to you after you die. Every religion I know, that's the basis of it, is what they believe happens to you after you die. And AA doesn't promise you anything after you're dead. I said AA does not promise to keep you from going to hell after you die. It just promises to keep you out of hell while you live. And it did that for me. And I as is common with people who do drugs and alcohol, I was very cavalier about going to hell. I used to say, that's fine, no problem. All my friends will be there. We'll get drunk, have a party. And besides that, if you're what's in heaven, I'm not interested in going there anyway. And but after I got sober, I started meeting some people who didn't think they were going to go to hell. And it kept me open long enough to begin what you were talking about in this spiritual experience and spiritual awakening. I had to laugh as you were sharing about the two, because it sort of explained in its own way why, if you ever want to, I don't know, I'm just guessing. One time I figured out that I have been to probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 to 6,000 12-step meetings in the years that I've been sober. Just as a ballpark, between 5,000 and 6,000. And you want to see a confused meeting? Go to one where the topic is the spiritual experience or the spiritual awakening. You will see so much confusion in the different ways that people share and what their interpretation. And it upsets some people, but I really appreciated the way that you said, no, actually, that's a good thing, that we don't have that standardized meaning, that standardized experience. And that's why I see so much confusion. Thanks.
Yeah, most people realize, early on that, and it's necessary, they find their own higher power, their own God. In other words, what I mean by that is, and I'm not talking about, there's all different kinds of gods out there. What I'm talking about is how you see God and how I see God is going to be different because we're unique people. And it's necessary for individuals in recovery to see their God of their understanding. In other words, it has to be something that's revealed to them personally, for that personal relationship to be there. Otherwise, you're just picking up on what somebody else said and hanging on to their coattails. And God doesn't have any grandkids. He's only got kids. So, Tom, you're all the way up there in the colder country up there in Ohio. So,
well,
what are your thoughts on
I brought sunshine to the world up here. It was 91 degrees in Cleveland today. It's a gorgeous day. I was looking forward to 65, but they all seem to like it. So I guess it's all right. And I took credit for it naturally coming up from Florida. One observation I want to make is I think the buffalo briefs do look more comfortable than the fig leaves that Adam and Eve had made. So in that regard, they're not so bad. The other issue was, I felt bad for that cow that was hung up on the fence, but if you looked at that picture closely, I felt even worse from the cow that was behind her, based on her position, her juxtaposition to the cow the black cow. I felt worse for the black cow. Anyhow.
No,
That's the codependent. You're right. It is a worse position.
yeah,
And you thought I wasn't paying attention.
that's a good, because because the addict just kind of on everybody.
Yeah. So anyways, just a couple of observations, follow up. First of all, I really appreciate Dave sitting in tonight, and I hope you keep sitting in and adding your experience, and I appreciate your honesty, Dave. And Pam, it's always good to hear what you have to say. And one thing that I caught my attention there, you were talking about, religion is just obsessed with what happens to us when we die. And I've never heard it expressed that way, but I think you're absolutely true. And you're right. You're right on that. And I made the comment the other night in another class that we were teaching. I used a quote from the movie in Lonesome Dove where Gus said, he says, "Not dying, I'm talking about is living." And in that case, he was talking about full-blooded enjoying life, and I equated that to thriving, and I think that's what one of the greatest benefits of going through the 12 steps in the Alpha series and understanding and learning the gospel, taking it to heart and learning this new lifestyle is that we actually are able to thrive here in this life. And I'm not talking about circumstances. I'm talking about, I think, what Paul was talking about when he said, I know how to abase and I know how to abound. You know, he was saying that I know how to thrive in any circumstance. But the other thing that really caught my attention, John used the word impose when he was talking about religion versus spirituality and saying that religion is something that is imposed upon us. And I fully agree with that. I will add to that and say that spirituality is something that's exposed. Okay, it's exposed in a couple of ways. First of all, it's exposed and through the revelation of the Word of God, properly understood in the context of grace, which we'll talk a lot more about as we go along in these series that we're teaching. But also, it's exposed through revelation of the Spirit. You know, and so many times I've been teaching a class and someone will come up to me or they'll raise their hand, they'll get real excited and they'll say, you know, I always knew that, but no one ever quite said it that way. And what merely happened there is that the Spirit enlightened them. It's not necessarily what I said, because the Word of God is unchanging. It's that it was exposed to them by revelation from that Spirit that lives within them. So, you know, I think of it as in terms of thriving. You know, when we are being imposed upon, and there's this pressure cooker of religion that's pressing us from all sides, trying to conform us into some cookie cutter denominational. Everyone's supposed to look the same type person. That's very uncomfortable, and it prevents the thriving that I'm talking about, rather than the Spirit of God expanding us from within and allowing us to blossom and expand. That's the thriving that I saw for other people, and probably the reason that I do these classes, because I love to see it when it happens in other people. So I'll kick it back to Bill or whoever wants to pile in on that.
All right. I like that thriving business. That sounds good. Bill.
Yeah. Are you surviving or are you thriving? Tonight's class reminded me of many things that, you know, God has shown me through the years. And as coming from an evangelical background and becoming acquainted with the 12 steps, one thing is that when I was around people like Pam, I wanted what they had. I saw that the people that were working the steps, that were involved in Alpha Ministries, had something. And when I did the steps, it filled in a lot of the missing pieces and got rid of a lot of the toxic faith that I was carrying around. And the thing that I was told by my tribe, my people, the evangelical, is that all that higher power stuff, you know, they were ignorant of it. They'd say, you know, the doorknob can be your higher power or whatever. And it's once I saw what it was, it kind of blew me away. And I really liked the way they framed it. I kind of reverse it when they say we've come to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And step 3, I see going together. We turn our lives and wills over to the care of God as we know. And I really believe people already know God. You know, that they already and the other way I see that framed is God is going to meet you right where you're at. That's what it means. You don't have to do anything we do. God will meet you right where you're at. And we see it in the scriptures where Paul, you know, talked about the unknown God. He didn't say you guys got it all wrong. He didn't say you have to pray this prayer first. He just went right to that. So, all right, you know this person. This is God, right? And we see it when Peter was on the rooftop the guy Cornelius, he knew God. He was praying to God. God heard his prayers. He hadn't said a prayer yet. He hadn't believed in Jesus. I believe that there's this knowing, and what God showed me years into my walk, things that happened in my childhood where I bowed my head and prayed to him. It's sort of the same conversation, the same knowing that I had then that I have now. In other words, and I think we talk about the light bulb being clicked on a lot, and the Holy Spirit being the teacher, is that the Holy Spirit is revealing truth to everybody. And when we have them cry out to God, God's going to be right where they're at.
Yeah.
You know, Martin French said it one time. He says, "Your higher power is going to have to keep you from using immediately when you want to use." You know, and so it filled in a lot of pieces for me, and even like being that I was a Christian for a long time, wasn't that, oh, I don't need to do step two. I needed to do step two and really understand that there's knowing that flows between us and God. We don't pay attention to it. We don't trust it. We think it has. We go to that religious thing that automatically put distance between us and God. You know, religion will always keep God at a safe distance, but God is insistent. He wants to come right into the middle of our crap.
And he has. I mean, that's the thing you're getting to, Bill, is that, you know, God has given each man a measure of faith, and Christ has lit each person with the opportunity. You know, one of the things you always struggle with, and I know in working with drug addicts and alcoholics especially, but others as well, is that, you know, they just say, I'm trying to have faith, you know, I just want to have faith. And trying to have faith is a lot like trying to lay an egg, you know, I want to lay an egg here somehow. The point is, you've already got it. The point is, you use what faith you have that's been given to you. And I know you got deep here, Bill, honest, and that's good, because that's a deeper understanding of step two. Is not just a rote ritualistic kind of prayer that says, okay, I trust God, because, you know, as I often say, that the question is not really, do you believe in God? The question is, does God believe in you? And the answer is, yes, he believes in you. You know, when you accept that by faith, you know, that he can restore us to sanity, because he does believe in us, because he knows who's made us to be. Then that spiritual enlightenment, that spiritual awakening begins to blossom a little bit in us. I think right now I would like for each one of you just to kind of give us a little quick summary statement as we close this step in step two. And let's come back to David. David, I appreciate you being here. I'm glad you're here with us. Just give us a little closing statement, if you will, about your experience with step two.
Well, step two, as you guys were talking, came to believe. No, I'm sorry. Drew a blank. Restore us to sanity. The first part of that is, I'm drawing a blank. But anyways, restored to sanity, I had to focus on what that insanity was. Now, there's all sorts of insanity, and I've had some in my life, but the insanity that came rushing home to me was the insanity of picking up a drink again, or a drug. Being restored to a state of mind and thinking that the insanity of picking up and drinking or drugging again, that's the restoration I was looking for.
Exactly.
I came to believe that a power greater than myself could do that. I struggled with the toxic faith. I struggled with John's belief of a higher power, other people at Dunklin's belief, and I didn't have my own. So I had to walk this thing out on my own, to, as I've learned, one step of faith at a time, to learn who he was, and the fact that he was meeting my needs, the fact that he was given me worth as a person. So those are things I had to do on my own. I couldn't walk in what you guys had. I had to learn to walk in what he gave me in my time frame. So the restoring of sanity is a part of that. And that's very important. And I go back to step one, where I was powerless over alcohol. Me as an addict or an alcoholic, I without admitting and accepting and digesting the reality that I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, my life is unmanageable with or without using alcohol and drugs. I was catapulted into step two and into step three because I had no choice. I cannot live on my own power. I cannot do that. I can't exist. I would be dead without this. Now, learning how to walk in that hour by hour, day by day is a step of faith, walk of faith. So that's kind of my experience with step two.
Yeah, we have a daily reprieve.
Yes.
Daily.
That's my favorite term, how I introduce myself at meetings is my name is Pam and I have a daily reprieve from alcoholism. Several things, but one of my favorite things about step two is that it says I came, and I recognize that that's a process, that if I'm coming to your house, I'm not there. I'm coming. I'm engaging in a series of pun intended steps to get there. But it's a process. It's not something that falls out of the sky. And my next favorite part of that is the term believe. And my understanding of believe is that it is a spiritual concept. It does not say I came to understand, which is based on facts. It says I came to believe, which is based on faith. And I have the exact same experience that everybody says, well, I don't have any faith. I said, oh, yes, you do. I said, everybody has faith. The only thing, the thing that makes us different from all the rest of God's creation is that measure of faith that we are given the free will to choose what I put it in. So we're not negotiating your faith. We're negotiating what you put it in. And most of the time, the reason you have attempted suicide is because you put it in yourself and you failed yourself so many times.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate that part of it. And then last but not least, the term sanity, which can always be negotiated, but our favorite definition in 12-step is that's doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. That's the insanity that we're to be delivered from. And probably a religious insanity is the most baffling that anyone can have. Thanks.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, that religious insanity is, I'm going to get God to do it, among other things. Tom, closing thoughts.
Well, a couple of you guys used the word steps in a couple different ways, but John, you gave an example of, this experience in your closet leading to this, because this immediate change and an immediate curing of your problem, and I equate that to a leap of faith versus walking in faith. Leaps of faith, when they happen, people have tremendous testimonies, and they make great stories, they make great movies and all that. And certainly people have acted by a leap of faith, and it's worked out for them, and God showed up and saved and rescued them. But most of the time I've experienced is that it's a walk of faith. And when I was a younger man, I wanted to take the leap of faith because that was the fastest way. When I was a younger man, I could leap I was a high jumper in high school. That was my thing in track and field. I could high jump and long jump, and I could leap, And now as I've gotten to be an older man, I prefer not to leap because I've fallen down as a result of those leaps enough times that I realize that it hurts, So I would prefer to do what the Bible usually talks about, and that's walking in faith. Taking baby steps, lots of little baby steps. And because when you do fall, it doesn't hurt quite as bad because you still do fall. It's just you've got not quite as far to fall, and it's not, the ground's not quite as hard. So I would prefer the walk of faith, and it equates to these 12 steps. And very often, there's a few steps backwards that happens. Relapse is a part of recovery, as Dave mentioned. He mentioned his relapse, but he's still here to tell us about it, and he's thriving at this time, day by day, step by step.
Yeah, and that's I like that, walking in faith, because it suggests what recovery really is, and that's a process. It's not an event. And
Right.
that's why everybody's in recovery, and will continue to be in recovery until we're finally glorified one day. But I appreciate that. Bill, wrap us up.
Yeah. So for me, for step 2, it was I saw it in the end of Romans 7 going into Romans chapter 8. I think Paul goes through step 1 and step 2 there, right in the end there, and that was kind of my experience, trying so hard to live out of my own strength, to live out of my own resources, and religious and toxic, and coming to the end of myself. Who will rescue me from this body of death? And when God put that all together for step 2, I remember it's like one of those flash bulbs that went off. Reading the beginning of Romans 8, I knew that God was going to do it. He just showed me that he had me, and he was taking responsibility for my life. And he used an illustration, something that my father had told me years and years and years ago when I was a teenager in trouble. And God kind of echoed that sentiment as though I'm taking responsibility for everything. And I was kind of on the other side. I was very codependent. But I had other addictions that, like we all need recovery. But I remember the moment when I came to believe that a power greater than myself was going to restore me to sanity. And I had been going to church and being a Christian and believing in God for 13 years, but this was a moment where I knew that God was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, that he was continue to do it. And it's been an unfolding process of that.
Right.
Because we have to review those steps all the time in our mind. I went through something the last 2 days that you talk about showing me that I'm powerless. Wow. Something happened where I immediately wanted to take control, and God just reminded me that I was powerless. I'm powerless. I'm powerless. Now I'm waiting for that power to restore me to sanity, because to where I stop thinking about how I'm going to take control. He's keeping me from taking control. Now I got to stop thinking about it, because it's turning my life and will over the care of God, which bridges us into next week. But God is doing. A lot of times we have to look around at what he's doing, right? Already. We don't have to whip up faith to make him do it. He's doing it. When we come to believe, there's this immediate relief we get and this rest, reprieve, but it's every day. Jesus is the bread of life every day. We ate yesterday. That doesn't mean we're not going to eat today, right?
That's a daily thing.
We have steak again. So that was a good study. I just wanted to just kind of say hi to everybody that's out there. Ed Baldwin's from Texas. Got our Bill Delaney. Appreciate all of you folks hanging with us. Like we said, if you ever have any questions, just type them right in there in the comments. If not, you can go into the private message box and ask us a question if it's private or anything. But get in touch with us. But thanks for letting us know that you're here. And I'll let John wrap it up. Before that, I just wanted to announce that Tom and I will be doing the relational empowerment on Thursday night at 7. We're still going over personal skills. We're going to talk a little bit more about personal enlightenment and cognitive reconstruction. That's this Thursday, 7 p.m. right here, what you're doing now. So same bat channel, so to speak. And John, what you got going on?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I might sneak in there on Thursday night. I heard you had somebody request my presence. Can you imagine that? Request my presence. And where the heck is he? I might just surprise you guys. You're doing a great job with it, and I appreciate you doing that. We will continue our study in Romans this Sunday. Church in the Woods out here at Freedom Ranch. We're open. I know there's a lot of churches that were supposed to open and haven't opened and all that stuff, but we're out in the woods, so we can get away with about anything. So if you want a place to come on this Sunday morning, you're welcome to come out here at 11 o'clock. We'll be open studying from Romans chapter 12 and 13 is what we're on right now. About to wrap up the study, so we invite you to come. I appreciate each one of you guys who've been here tonight, Bill and Pam, and David and Tom. I appreciate you all taking your time to join in on this class because I think your input is vital to it. I really do. And I appreciate each one of you being here. So with that being said, I'm going to shut up and go to the house and eat supper.
All right. Good night.
Good night, everybody.